Right, so Labour suspensions or expulsions based on support for Gaza and for a ceasefire in Gaza should be a thing of the past now that the parliamentary party and Keir Starmer have formally backed one, albeit on their own terms after hijacking an SNP Opposition day to do so, as they did last month. So surely speaking up for Gaza and demanding others do likewise now, as a Labour member or representative, a ceasefire position that has now been reached at parliamentary level, well, it should be okay now, shouldn't it? Censorship for such things should be a thing of the past. Well, no, it isn't, as events on Hounslow Borough Council have exploded, with divisions wrought amongst Muslim Labour Councillors, 2 abstaining Labour MPs that are opposed for their abstentions on Gaza are now being shielded with apparent hypocrisy by some who claim to want a Gaza ceasefire, who have turned against one of their own, who has now been suspended indefinitely. This is amongst the most vicious Labour infighting over the subject of a Gaza ceasefire I've heard of to date, where those demanding a ceasefire are the ones being punished. Right, so what's this one about then, Damo? Labour back a ceasefire now. We know this, they voted for it, they shanghaied an SNP ceasefire motion to get there. So why are people still getting the treatment for backing what is party position now? There's another council cracking up under the strain of Labour's do they back a ceasefire really, or are they just saying it attitude? Because the ceasefire called for isn't really one when it scuppered a proper ceasefire motion in order to be pushed through. It's a heavily watered down amendment. This is what we saw Starmer organise last month, leaning on Lindsay Hoyle as it appeared that he did in order to get his way. It is to be made clear though that despite that, this latest mess is happening on a Labour-run council, massively so, with a sizable Muslim representation on it to boot. And indeed, one of the councillors at the centre of this is Muslim themselves, so we'll start with them. This individual concerned is a chap called Councillor Amrit Mann, who has represented Labour and his constituents in Heston East on Hounslow Borough Council for the last 30 years. He was the mayor of Hounslow from 2011 to 2012 and has served as the deputy mayor as well in that time. But he committed the cardinal sin of backing a ceasefire, and he's called out others who had backed one before by their actions in calling out the 2 borough MPs for their previous abstentions for not later doing so, for not keeping their word, so to speak. And the councillors concerned in that hypocrisy were also members of the mosque committee with links to Hounslow Borough Council. So we have a Muslim councillor being hung out to dry by fellow Muslim councillors over a Gaza ceasefire. So this is a truly horrible situation, and all of it happening at the beginning of this month. So after Starmer rammed his amendment through to the SNP Gaza ceasefire motion in Parliament, which has led to Labour MPs still being able to say they back a ceasefire, without actually doing anything proactive to that end. This story essentially starts with that mosque committee. The councillors on Hounslow Borough Council who are part of the mosque committee, often referred to as mosque members or simply as mosques. By its nature, you can appreciate this is a committee of the council's Muslim members, or a group of them anyway. And they, as the mosque committee, had voted to call for the resignations of the 2 members of Parliament for Hounslow Borough, both Labour, who are the MP for Feltham and Heston, Seema Malhotra, also the Shadow Minister for Skills, and the MP for Brentford and Isleworth, Ruth Cadbury, also the Shadow Prisons Minister, both of whom had previously abstained on that ceasefire vote back in November, though had voted for Starmer's scam of an amendment last month. Now, the issue that's arisen is that when it came to the crunch, mosque councillors suddenly lost their voices when it came to Gaza, and Councillor Mann wanted to know why. So he messaged them on WhatsApp, calling them out, asking them to justify what he saw as their hypocrisy at this point over Gaza, because they had backed pushing for the resignations of those 2 MPs. And before he knew it, he turned out to end up being subjected to a formal complaint having been made against him, and he would face a disciplinary hearing. So to this end, he issued a statement. As you are aware, there is a formal complaint against me which accuses me of maligning the Muslim members of this Labour group and seeking them to resign. This is completely untrue. Let me explain by going through the WhatsApp text line by line. Firstly, my response was to a WhatsApp text asking why our Labour group can't discuss this in the full borough meeting. The meeting being discussed here is the Borough Council, not Labour group. Secondly, especially when 21 members are Muslims by religion, is a fact and indisputable. And thirdly, the question that begs itself is that if these mosques candidates cannot speak for themselves, then how are they going to speak up for their residents? The above sentence does not refer to all Muslim councillors, but only those mosque candidates who are holding position as councillors, but simultaneously are mosque committee members/trustees or have a family member on the mosque committee. E.g., my attempt to explain this duality with the two horses analogy, whereby as a councillor you have the secular political position, but by one's own choice as a mosque candidate councillor you also have the moral platform representation, and which in a situation such as now seeks morality first before politics. Given the mosque was seeking the resignation of our two members of parliament, Seema Malhotra and Ruth Cadbury, on their abstention on the Gaza issue, I was incensed with the hypocrisy being shown by the mosque candidates' councillors in seeking the MP's resignation without a single utterance or dissent from themselves on their part. The whole two lines were as a result of numerous members of the community, mainly Muslims, including imams, who were approaching me to represent their discord. I think the lines are clear as it makes a clear distinction between Muslim and mosque in the construct of the sentence in a private WhatsApp group where the discussion had been on the Middle East situation, and the complainants, who are not WhatsApp group members, have taken this out of context and got it wrong. Why is this vexatious non-complaint being pursued vigorously? I was surprised to be called in by the Chief Whip regarding this complaint. On hearing the complaint, I had offered to apologise unreservedly in writing to all 21 Muslim councillors, but I was asked not to do so by the Chief Whip. The three complainants know very little about me, and to make such a poor, tenuous and incredulous complaint requires some guts and backing. The same guts that have been missing to date on speaking up on the real issue. I suspect the lack of vocals by the mosque candidates and the mosque is to deflect criticism for their own failures in not speaking up, and the complaints seeking to collectively to malign the entire Muslim councillors to give itself traction and gain credibility. I have always stood for what is right and fair, but with this complaint some of the Labour group members have stooped to new lows, and I fear there is more to come. So we have three Muslim councillors who had made this complaint, who were not privy to the WhatsApp messages because they weren't in the WhatsApp group. So how did they get wind of it? And despite offering to apologise in writing to all 21 Muslim councillors for his WhatsApp getting misconstrued, his annoyance aimed at mosque committee councillors and not all Muslim councillors, the Chief Whip, a chap called John Stroud Turp, formerly of the military, a reputation for being a bit of a hard man, telling him not to do so, and all in all, it landed Amrit Mann in a disciplinary which turned out to be a complete kangaroo court. The Whip recommended a 3-month suspension for him, but instead another Muslim councillor proposed suspending him indefinitely, which was seconded by the non-Muslim deputy leader, and this got carried. Punished for standing up for Gaza, punished for standing up to his own party and challenging them on that, on Hounslow Borough Council, and fellow councillors punished him despite 30 years of service to the council and to the party. Why was this pursuit of Amrit Mann carried out so vociferously? He certainly wants to know. Well, according to local media outlet Brentford Today and TV, Mann was set to challenge the current council leader Shantanu Rajawat, who he has been a strong critic of. Mann was also being touted as a possible challenger to Seema Malhotra for her Feltham and Heston seat. In fact, it was accusations of leaks to that outlet, to Brentford Today and TV, that prompted the increase in punishment for Amrit Mann, as he was accused of being the council leak to them, despite denying it and there being no proof, no evidence whatsoever of him doing it or of who might have been leaking information to that local outlet. So they're a paranoid bunch on Hounslow Borough Council, it would seem. What a shame I've just made a video on all of this, in which case, it'd be a swine if it got shared around and people got wind of another Labour council being run like this. The vote to suspend was apparently heavily split too, showing divisions within the Labour group, who overwhelmingly control this council. 34 votes to 14 to suspend Amrit Mann indefinitely, so there was more than a dozen abstentions as well, which just goes to show the damage caused by such factional and wrecking behaviour. There's no unity here. It just destroys. Solidarity to Councillor Mann, another decent local Labour politician, unwanted by the factional takeover of the Starmeroids, more interested in internal squabbles than serving their constituencies. Certainly how it appears here. This is a forming pattern, though, of course, so we're hearing more and more stories like this. Here we have a councillor effectively binned by the party, an indefinite suspension, meaning that he can't stand for Labour again come 2026, when Hounslow seats are up for election again. But Starmer's literally lost control of 4 entire councils to date through factionalism and through his weak as water support for a Gaza ceasefire, not daring to defy his Israel lobby backers. But equally is a question of incompetence as well. And in that vein, here's a video recommendation for you where the mayor, Labour mayor, can't even get her own budget ratified by her own Labour Party group, even when one of her sidekicks happens to be chair of the Labour National Executive Committee itself. Get the details of that story on this video recommendation here, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.